The Hindu's China correspondent Atul Aneja is live with us from Beijing. Atul, good evening. Lots being made of this climb down in many ways by Carrie, but could this be a delay tactic?
Well, I think better sense has prevailed, better late than never. You see, the implications were huge because of the timing of these massive protests. Unlike other protests, if you recall in 2014, if I recall correctly, there was this student protest which took place but did not have the backing of crucial sections of Hong Kong society, just like the business community. But in this case, it's a business community which fears that the law can be used for their extradition to China. So the amount of support from powerful sections within Hong Kong has been much more in these protests than has been the case earlier. And I think the Carrie Lam administration has recognized this, though belatedly, that it has to climb down right now. But I don't think it's going to be a tactical withdrawal. I think Beijing is very much interested that while it has many fires to fight, such as the trade war with the US and other issues which are coming up, security, South China Sea, that Hong Kong doesn't once again become another flashpoint which can be used by those who oppose those who oppose China, especially in the United States in the Trump administration, can use that as a stick to beat China, especially at this crucial moment before the G20 summit, where Mr. Xi, President Xi Jinping, is expected to meet President Trump of the United States. So I think the timing is very bad for the Chinese side for this to flare up any further. So I'm not surprised that the climb down has taken place. But I do think that there's going to be more to it in the sense that China may want some internal changes within Hong Kong to take place to ensure that it doesn't flare up anytime soon. Much more is likely to happen behind the scenes from now onwards.
Indeed. Another hallmark, if you will, of this protest, Atul, was the manner in which it was organized. A lot of people were commending the organized structure of this protest, the fact that social media was used extremely effectively to gather people together. In fact, some people weren't even, recharging their Oyster cards. They were going and standing in line so as not to leave a footprint, if you will, of being associated with these protests. Was that also a concern for Beijing? The fact that this was organized so well, that demonstrations were so visceral and visually arresting for the rest of the world. How exactly did Beijing cover the story, if it did at all?
No, look, there was little comment on the state media, except Global Times went on to say that the foreign forces were involved in mobilizing these protests. This has been usually the standard line. So not too much in terms of the internal dynamics of the protests, except for this bland line which came from Beijing. But I do think what you said, that this was a very sophisticated protest, both in terms of how it would be visually appealing to the rest of the world, how media, including social media, was used for this, and the tactics which were employed. If you recall, in the earlier protests in 2014, no one took the steps to sort of storm the parliament. In this case, to keep the attention on the protests and to keep it in the international limelight, certain tactics were used, and I do believe that there was a lot of thinking which went behind. So obviously, it was very well organized and planned by the protesters. I had covered the Arab Spring in Egypt and other places before my current assignment to China, and this time, in contrast, this appeared much more organized than probably those protests which took place. I mean, if you have to internationalize these protests, I mean, how do they compare, let's say, what happened in Ukraine, what happened? So from the Chinese perspective, you see, Chinese are really worried about these color revolutions, and they will do everything possible to make sure that these protests do not acquire that kind of a halo and an appeal. And therefore, I come back to my original point that though it has been very sophisticated, the protests, etc., the Chinese will go the extra mile to ensure that this does not happen soon. So a lot of activity behind the scenes, as I said earlier.
All right. Last question, Atul. Just talking a little bit more about what happened on Wednesday. There was this face-to-face confrontation between the demonstrators and the police. 5,000 riot police personnel on the streets of Hong Kong. Allegations of excessive force, human rights violations have been hurled at the police and authorities in Hong Kong. Again, bad press for China ahead of the G20 summit. Also, given the fact that there have been many questions raised about how this is a very pro-Beijing, pro-China lobby that is in place in Hong Kong right now. Therefore, the timing, as you were saying, is crucial, but also very important for China to appear like, it's not striking down with force on any sort of dissent.
You see, I think the real mess-up has not happened in Beijing, but at the local level in Hong Kong. Because as you mentioned, Carrie Lam herself was personally driven into this extradition law after the murder case which took place in Taiwan. But I doubt they understood the broader dimensions. They were not just no longer a local issue, but how badly it will get internationalized and acquire geopolitical implications. I think the local authorities really did not gauge all the dimensions of their action. As I said, the business community, the core of Hong Kong, so long as it's aligned with Beijing or is at peace with Beijing, there's likely to be not much of a problem in managing these kind of protests. But if you alienate the core of Hong Kong, I mean, its status as an international center of finance, entire rise of China in reform process is originated from Hong Kong, where Deng Xiaoping. So the point I'm making is that Hong Kong is so very important that the Chinese probably came in to diffuse the crisis after it was messed up by the local authorities.